I'm calling the dive. Current's too strong at depth. Visibility's already shot below the thermocline. Kyle Anson said it with the flat authority of a dive team leader who has made the call and is not revisiting it. He was standing at the stern of the survey vessel, dry suit on but hood down, looking at the water over the target site, and the old man in the Navy Henley was standing beside him, checking the pressure gauge on his double steel 72s with the unhurried attention of someone who has already made a different decision. The old man did not look up from the gauge. "How strong at depth?" he said. Anson looked at him. The old man was 74 years old, and he was wearing a wetsuit that had been manufactured at a point in time when Kyle Anson had not yet been born, and he was checking a regulator that looked like it belonged in a maritime museum, and he had arrived on the survey boat that morning with equipment that Mara had photographed discreetly because she had never seen working gear that old. At 80 feet, the current is running about a knot and a half off the bow section, Anson said. Maybe 2 knots at the stern. The thermocline is at 60 feet, and visibility drops to maybe 3 feet below it. My team agreed. Conditions are outside our operational parameters for a wreck penetration dive. The old man clicked the dust cap back onto the second stage. He looked at the water. "What's the bottom time your team was planning?" he said. 20 minutes max at depth, Anson said. "It's not a bottom time issue. It's current and viz." The old man nodded once. He reached into the equipment bag and produced his dive slate, a wrist-mounted writing surface, the slate itself worn smooth from use, a grease pencil attached by a cord. "I'll do a reconnaissance dive," he said. "Not penetration. I want to see the bow section and the forward cargo hold access. 40 minutes, total bottom time. I'll be back on the line." Anson stared at him. "Sir," he said. "With respect, our team turned this dive. A knot and a half of current and 3-foot visibility at 80 feet is not a recreational challenge. It is genuinely dangerous." The old man looked at him for the first time since the conversation had started. The brown eyes were very still and very direct. "I know what a knot and a half feels like at 80 feet, he said. "I've worked in worse." He reached for his fins, what Kyle Anson did not know, and what nothing in the morning's logistics had told him, because Leonard Cass had given his name at check-in and nothing more, was that the old man now clipping his fins to his BCD had been a Navy frogman for 22 years. That he had made his first combat dive in 1969 in waters that made a knot and a half current and 3-foot visibility look like conditions worth celebrating. That he had participated in the original NOAA survey of the SS Delmarva in 1974, this exact wreck, this exact location, as the primary dive team member, and had logged 14 dives on the wreck across that survey period, and had written the depth and current profiles in the original dive log that was now in Dana Reyes's waterproof bag. He knew this wreck the way you know something you have been to before, in worse conditions, when it mattered more. He also knew the current pattern at the bow section, the way the hull's shape deflected the prevailing bay current into a clockwise eddy on the port side that created a near still zone along the forward 15 feet of the port rail at depth. A zone that was not visible from the surface, that no instrument had ever captured because it was too small and too localized, but that he had found in 1974 and had used on every subsequent dive on the wreck. A zone that made the bow section approach, for someone who knew it was there, straightforward rather than dangerous. It was the kind of knowledge that only existed in the body of a man who had been to this specific place in these specific conditions and had paid attention. If you believe that 50 years of diving the same water gives you a map that no instrument can produce, type Frogman in the comments right now. Because what Leonard Cass finds at 83 feet in 3-foot visibility with a knot and a half of current is not luck and not recklessness. It is the accumulated precision of a man who has been reading underwater terrain since before some of his critics were born. His full name was Leonard James Cass. He had been born in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, in the spring of 1951, the second son of a waterman who had worked the Chesapeake for 30 years and a woman who had taught him, before he was 10, that the bay had moods and that the moods had patterns and that the patterns could be read by anyone patient enough to watch them across enough seasons. He had grown up on the water, not near it, on it, in it, under it, as soon as he was old enough to learn to dive. His father had taken him to his first dive at age 9, an equipment check on a crab pot line in 10 feet of water off the family's work skiff, and from that point the bay had been as natural an environment to him as land. He had learned its bottom topography, its current patterns, its visibility characteristics in different seasons and tidal conditions, the way the thermocline moved with temperature, and the way the water below the thermocline behaved differently from the water above it. He had learned all of this the same way his father had learned the crab grounds, by going there repeatedly across different conditions, until the pattern was as familiar as the road home. He had enlisted in the Navy in 1969, at 18, and had been assessed, based on swimming evaluations that one petty officer had described as the best he had seen in 11 years of processing recruits, and on a physical examination that placed him in the top 1 percentile for cardiopulmonary efficiency, for Underwater Demolition Team training, the predecessor to what would become the Navy SEALs. He had completed UDT training at Coronado in 1970 and had deployed with UDT-13 to Southeast Asia later that year, where his underwater work had included reconnaissance of enemy underwater obstacles, hull inspection in hostile port environments, and the specific controlled violence of combat diving that was nothing like any civilian diving context and everything like the bay in a bad autumn storm. Dark, cold, current-stressed, and requiring the complete absence of panic. He had come home in 1972 with a chest full of commendations he kept in a shoebox and a certainty about what he was capable of underwater that no subsequent condition had dislodged. He had spent the rest of his Navy career in diving operations, training, curriculum development, and operational diving at various commands, retiring as a Chief Petty Officer in 1991. He had spent the following 33 years doing what he had always done, diving. The Chesapeake, primarily, though he had dived the Atlantic coast from Maine to Florida and several Caribbean sites that he considered worth the travel. He had participated in maritime heritage surveys as a civilian volunteer for the Maryland Historical Trust and for NOAA's Maritime Heritage Program, which was how his name had come to be in Dana Reyes's institutional records, and in the 1974 dive log for the SS Delmarva survey that was currently in her waterproof bag. He had been invited to join the current survey as a civilian consultant, specifically because Reyes had found the 1974 logs and had noted that the current team's profiles of the wreck did not match the original survey profiles in ways that suggested the wreck had shifted or settled, and that someone who had been there in 1974 might be able to identify what had changed. He had arrived with his equipment. He had not expected to have to argue about whether he was going in the water. Anson had made one more attempt, a careful, professional explanation of the specific risks at depth on this dive, offered with genuine concern and the specific emphasis of a dive team leader who takes team safety seriously. The old man had listened to all of it the same way he listened to everything, completely without interrupting, with the patient attention of someone who is gathering information rather than waiting for a pause to speak. And then he had said, "I'll enter on the upstream side and use the eddy at the port bow to approach. The current won't be a factor past the forward 20 feet of the hull. I've used that eddy before." Anson had stared at him. "What eddy?" he said. "The port bow creates a clockwise deflection of the prevailing current," Len said. "There's a near still zone along the forward port rail at depth. It's been there since 1974. It's a product of the hull geometry, so it won't have changed. I'll enter the still zone and work from there." Anson looked at Mara. Mara looked back with the expression of someone who has been quietly revising her assessment of the old man since he came aboard. "You've been to this wreck before," Anson said. "In 1974, Len said. 14 dives. I logged the current profiles." He looked at Anson. "Your team's profiles don't account for the bow eddy because the sonar passes at the survey altitude wouldn't have detected it. It's too small and too localized, but it's there." He put his mask on. "I'll be 40 minutes, he said. "If I'm not back in 50, send someone with a line." He stepped off the stern. "Subscribe to Iron and Honor right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because what Dana Reyes shows Kyle Anson while Leonard Cass is underwater, and what they see when he surfaces 41 minutes later with his dive slate full of notations, is something that the current team's 3 previous attempts on this wreck had not produced, and that only one person alive could have found." Reyes had waited until Len was in the water, had watched the bubble trail move from the entry point toward the upstream hull side, had watched it slow and then stop, settling into the position just forward of the bow that corresponded exactly to where she knew the eddy would be. She had been to the 1974 log many times. She had always wondered what the eddy felt like. She reached into her waterproof bag. She removed the 1974 dive log, a bound waterproof journal, the original, photocopied for the institutional archive, but the original kept by the Maritime Heritage Program, because primary source documents were held as primary source documents. She opened it to the 3rd survey dive, dated April 14, 1974. She set it on the stern rail where Anson could read it. The entry was in 2 hands, the survey supervisor's notes in the left margin and the diver's notes in the main body. The diver's notes were in a compact, precise handwriting that she had read enough times to recognize immediately. The entry described the bow section approach, current conditions, entry method, the identification of the port bow eddy, the first documentation of the near still zone and its estimated dimensions. At the bottom, diver L. Cass, CPO USN, time in 0847, time out 0931, 44 minutes, the same man, the same wreck, 50 years ago. Anson read it. He read the entry twice. He looked at the water where the bubble trail showed a man working steadily along the port hull at depth. "He logged this eddy in 1974, he said. "First documentation," Reyes said. "It's been cited in 3 subsequent surveys as the access method for the bow section. Your team's current profiles didn't include it because we came in from the starboard side," Anson said quietly. "Based on the sonar profile, we never found the eddy because we approached from the wrong side." He looked at the dive log. He looked at the water. "How many times has he been here?" he said. 14 in 1974, Reyes said. "Twice since, once in 1989 and once in 2003. He wrote the first wreck profile that's still the foundational reference document for the site." She paused. "I invited him as a consultant specifically because the current survey doesn't match the 1974 profile in the stern section. Something has changed. I thought he might be able to tell us what." Anson was quiet. He looked at the dive log. He looked at the bubble trail. Steady, deliberate, moving along the hull in a direction his team had never approached from. He said quietly, he knew the approach before he got in the water. He's been running that approach for 50 years, Reyes said. Len surfaced 41 minutes after entry. He came up on the port side, removed his regulator and mask in the same sequence he had removed them 10,000 times, and hooked his arm over the stern ladder without being asked. He climbed aboard the same way. No dramatics, no particular effort shown. The climb of a man who has climbed out of the water so many times that the movement is pure reflex. He sat on the dive bench and took the dive slate from his wrist. He had written on every available surface of the slate, the grease pencil covering the wax in a dense pattern of notations, depths, headings, observations, a sketch of the stern section as it currently presented. He looked at Anson. The stern has settled, he said. Approximately 4 feet of additional silt accumulation since 2003. I have the 2003 profile in my log at home for comparison. The cargo hold access is partially blocked. You can get through the forward aperture, but the clearance is about 14 inches now, down from 30 in 1974. He looked at the slate. The mid-hull is stable. The boiler has rolled about 15 degrees to port since 1989. You can see the marine growth pattern on the original seating position. The propeller shaft is clear and accessible from the port quarter approach. He held up the slate. I made a sketch. Mara was already reaching for the slate. She looked at the sketch. She looked at Anson. She looked at the slate again. This is more information than 3 survey attempts gave us, she said. I know where to look, Len said. He reached for his water bottle. And I know what the wreck is supposed to look like. When something has changed from what you remember, it's obvious. If you've never been before, you don't know what changed. Anson sat down on the bench across from him. He looked at the dive log that Reyes had set on the bench, still open to the April 1974 entry. The eddy, he said. The port bow eddy. You found it on the first dive in 1974? Third dive, Len said. First dive I came in from the starboard side and fought the current the whole way. Second dive I came in from upstream and got pushed off the hull before I made the bow. Third dive I held position on the upstream side and let the hull deflect the current around me, and found the zone. He looked at the water. After that I always used it. We came in from the starboard side, Anson said. 3 attempts. I know, Len said. I could tell from your bubble trails. You were fighting it the whole way down. Anson was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell us? He said. Len looked at him. You told me the dive was off, he said. There was no edge in it. Pure fact, delivered with the same tone he used for everything. I thought it would be more useful to demonstrate than to argue. Anson absorbed this. He looked at the sketch on the slate. The stern section profile, the silt accumulation, the boiler displacement, the propeller shaft access notation. The sketch of a man who had known this wreck for 50 years and had spent 41 minutes updating his knowledge of it. He picked up the dive log and read the April 1974 entry again. Then he picked up his waterproof notebook, the one he used for team dive briefings, and opened it to a clean page. The port bow eddy, he said. Can you walk me through the approach? Current direction, entry angle, how you find the still zone? Len looked at him. He looked at the water. He set down the water bottle and reached for the slate. He drew it. The hull profile, the current vector, the deflection pattern, the entry line that intersected the still zone at the forward port rail. He drew it in the same compact, precise notation he had been drawing dive briefings in since 1970. He handed the slate to Anson. "Use this on your next dive," he said. "Come in from the northwest. Angle toward the port bow on a heading of about 110. Hold at 20 feet depth until you're within 5 boat lengths of the hull. The still zone will be obvious when you hit it. The current just stops. Once you're in it, the whole bow section is accessible." Anson looked at the drawing. He looked at the dive log. He looked at the old man in the Navy Henley and the boat shoes and the 50-year-old dive watch on his left wrist. "Mr. Cass," he said, "how long have you been diving the Chesapeake?" "Since I was 9, Len said. "In earnest, since 1970. He calculated briefly. "About 54 years of open water diving in this bay." Anson was quiet. He thought about the current condition at 83 feet that his team had found outside their operational parameters. He thought about the old man stepping off the stern and using a still zone his team had never found. He thought about 41 minutes and a full slate of survey data. He thought about what a knot and a half of current feels like when you know exactly where to stand to be out of it. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for calling the dive before you had a chance to make your case." Len looked at him. "You were doing your job," he said. "Your team's safety is your first call. You didn't know what I know about this site." He took the dive log from the bench and handed it back to Reyes. "Now you do." He began breaking down his equipment, the same sequence, the same unhurried precision he brought to gearing up. Regulator off the first stage, O-ring inspection, dust cap on. Harness unclipped in the same order every time. Mara had been photographing his equipment discreetly since he came aboard. She looked up from the camera. "The regulator," she said. "How old is it?" Len looked at it. "My first stage is 1974, he said. "I've replaced the seats and springs 4 times. The body is original." He set it in the case. "If you maintain it properly, there's no reason to replace it." He zipped the case. He looked out at the water over the wreck, the gray October bay, the buoy marking the site, the place he had first entered 50 years ago and had never stopped returning to. He had logged one more dive today. He would add it to the notebook at home. The same waterproof notebook he had been using since 1971. The pages dense with 53 years of entries for dives in this bay and elsewhere. A record of where he had been and what he had found and what had changed and what had stayed the same. The SS Delmarva had settled 4 feet at the stern. The boiler had rolled 15 degrees to port. The forward aperture had narrowed from 30 inches to 14. The port bow eddy was exactly where it had always been. Some things in the water stayed true for a long time, if you knew where to look. Reyes filed her survey report 6 weeks later. The report's primary data source was the current team's sonar profile and Mara's photography. 3 survey dives conducted successfully on subsequent visits using lens approach methodology. The port bow eddy documented for the first time in the NOAA digital record. The report's historical context section cited the 1974 dive logs extensively and included in the appendix the sketch from Len's dive slate, the hull profile, the current vector, the deflection pattern, the entry line, annotated with the note, "Original documentation, L. Cass, CPOUSN, Reduction, October 2025. Subsequent visits confirmed all observations. Anson submitted the sketch separately to NAUI's Technical Dive Training Program as a case study in site-specific current management. The documented use of a hull geometry created eddy to access a current-stressed wreck site. The case study was accepted. It cited, in its first paragraph, the original 1974 documentation by Leonard Cass. Len received a copy of the case study in the mail. He read it at his kitchen table. He made 2 small corrections to the current vector description. The angle was slightly off, and mailed it back with a note. The heading should be 115, not 110, on the entry line. He had checked his dive slate. He filed his own report of the dive in the notebook. 1 entry, standard format, the same format he had used since 1971. Then he drove to the bay and went for a dive. Not the Delmarva, a reef site he had been visiting since 1973, where the seagrass had been recovering in a way he wanted to document. He had photographed it every year since 1998. The photographs were in an album in the study. 27 years of the same site, the same season, the same depth, showing a bay coming back from damage it had sustained when he was young. He documented it the same way he documented everything, by going there, paying attention, and writing down what he saw. There are men in this country who have been reading the same water for 50 years, who know a specific wreck the way a surgeon knows a specific anatomy, who can find a still zone in a current from memory, who climb out of the water at 74 looking like they went for an errand and return with information that 3 previous attempts could not produce. Leonard Cass has been diving the Chesapeake Bay since he was 9 years old. He has been logging it since 1971. He knows the port bow eddy of the SS Delmarva the way he knows the road home, not because he studied it, but because he has been there enough times that the knowledge lives in his body and not just his mind, and bodies remember differently than documents do. The dive team called it. He went down alone. He came back 41 minutes later with a full slate and a sketch that became a training case study and a survey reference document and the definitive record of a wreck's 50-year evolution. He made 2 corrections to the heading before he filed it. Subscribe to Iron and Honor for the men who know the water that other people call unreachable. Hit the bell. Don't miss the next one. The wreck was unreachable if you came in from the starboard side. Leonard Cass has been coming in from the port side since 1974. He knew where the still water was. He had always known where the still water was.